So, sometimes hearing the truth can be hard, but I would like to say that we have some amazing other faith leaders here, and before he sneaks out, I would like to say just quickly to Father Matthias as he walks out, thank you, my friend. God bless. Pastor Christensen as well, also adhering to these teachings. So our next speaker is fantastic, comes all the way in from Washington, D.C. metropolitan area, Timothy Goeglein. I'm going to have to read this more than I did with Reverend Thoma. Anytime you stumble upon someone who reflexively calls any clergy father, you've stumbled on a Catholic. So, he's already here. Reverend Thoma has already left. So Tim, I'm going to have to read this more because he has actually a lot of very impressive titles over the course of his career. He is currently Vice President of External Relations for Focus on the Family, which is a global Christian ministry dedicated to helping families thrive. They provide help and resources for couples to build healthy marriages that reflect God's design, and for parents to raise their children according to morals and values grounded in biblical principles. Timothy, prior to his work for Focus on the Family, was special assistant to President George W. Bush and worked as deputy director of the White House Office of Public Liaison from 2001 to 2006. Did I get that right? Yeah. All right, excellent. Prior to that, he worked for 10 years as deputy press secretary and then press secretary and communications director for U.S. Senator Dan Coats of Indiana. Tim went to Indiana University, and while there held positions under then Senator Dan Quayle and then Representative Dan Coats. After his graduation, he went to work for the NBC News affiliate out of Fort Wayne, Indiana. He has served on numerous boards and councils, including he is a senior fellow for the Heritage Foundation, the American Conservative Union Foundation, the Institute for American Universities, National Civic Arts Society, and Young America's Foundation, which owns and operates Ronald Reagan's ranch in Santa Barbara, California. Most importantly, he has been a deacon at his church for 25 years, is married to his lovely wife, Jennifer, which I assume, I've never met her, but I assume she's lovely. He's good looking, so she's got to be. He has two sons, Tim and Paul. Please help me welcome Tim Goeglein.
Good evening, everyone. After an introduction like that, I should say thank you and good night. But I will not. Chris Thoma is a force of nature for good. And so is Greg Seltz, with whom I am honored and pleased to work in Washington, D.C. What an honor that I'm in your home state tonight and with your wonderful parents. It's a great honor. And also Martha Mitkos, who's a great friend from St. Louis and the Missouri Synod. We have worked together through the years on various things, one of the great people in our synod. I must say as well, and you can't plan these things because they are the things of providence. I know you all love Ben Shapiro as much as I do. In the history of cable television news, you may or may not know that just in the last couple of days, he made the most pro-life statement in the history of American television. Are you aware of that? The impact of his remarkable statement was so phenomenal that I think it crashed the phone systems in New York and Washington. I think we should stand up before he gets here and say thanks for doing that. And it is true that I'm just in from Washington, otherwise known as a place of 68 square miles surrounded by reality. And when I landed in Michigan tonight, I could just smell freedom. It was so great to be back in the United States of America. The elevation of Brett Kavanaugh to the Supreme Court is a conservative victory of generational proportions. It is the capstone of a decades-long project to fundamentally change the judicial branch of our government. in ways that once seemed locked down on abortion and affirmative action and gun rights, and for purposes of our gathering tonight, religious liberty. I was in the room, in the hearing room, when Cory Booker, Spartacus, yes, he's a Rhodes Scholar. Richard Rhodes is spinning. The question, he said, is not, I'm quoting, the question is not whether he's innocent or guilty, said Cory Booker. I want us all to internalize that for a moment as Christians. This amounted to saying that Brett Kavanaugh lacks a judicial temperament because he objected to being summarily executed following a show trial. Now, just as there are people famous for being famous, now there are people guilty of being accused. This is the heart and soul of the American project. It is what another justice, Samuel Alito, referred to in the Supreme Court case redefining marriage, redefining family, redefining parenthood, Obergefell. He referred to it as the coming of the new orthodoxy. And we are learning more and more, aren't we, after the last 3 weeks of what the keepers of the new sexual orthodoxy that they are imposing upon our country without asking all of you what this actually means. Unless I be misunderstood, I'll say it outright. Are you ready for this? Your rulers are becoming very impatient with you. They do not, I'm raising my right hand, they do not view us as citizens. They view us as subjects. This is antithetical to the American project, which begins in the great Jewish and Christian traditions. I want to be even more bold, if I may, because if the left can willfully and even gleefully destroy a man as distinguished as Brett Kavanaugh, they can and they will do it to any person who threatens their grip on power. The left's will to power by any means necessary is the key to the project. I am, by God's grace alone, a cradle Lutheran Christian. The absolute presumption of the foundation of our faith runs counter to the most despicable thing that any of us have witnessed in American public life easily in the last 15 years. Did you see the absolute happiness and joy that these people were taking in this man's suffering? If you pick up the Holy Bible and you turn to any passage in the New Testament, any, you will find how deeply providence resents the joy and the glee that any of us could ever possibly take from the suffering of another human being. The court of public opinion is different, praise God, from a court of law. And what has happened as a result of this is a crystallization of a deeply bitter societal divide, largely arising from you, the public, Democrats and Republicans, liberals and conservatives of goodwill, who are disgusted, and rightfully so, at the political and the media elite of our nation. I have been stunned as you have over and over again. We are taught as the youngest of Christians, we are taught that we are to speak humbly, that we are to attend to all the facts patiently, in deference to reality and the truth of things. That's what my first Sunday school teacher, Mrs. Pfeiffer, taught us. We have witnessed, in reality, a diminution of all kinds of things that comprise the Christian worldview. The meaning of marriage, the meaning of fatherhood and motherhood, the meaning of masculinity and femininity, what unfortunately some of our adversaries refer to as the antique way of thinking. The result, alas, as we have heard from your great pastor, for some of our beloved and exceptional country, is a moral cesspool. My grandmother taught me to love poetry. I will never forget, maybe you won't either, that little ditty, "Will you walk into my parlor?" said the spider to the fly. We are sent as sheep into a world of wolves. There is a 14th century maxim, and it has warned all of us and should be clear as a mountain stream, even in this great state without mountains. And here it is: he who sups with the devil should have a long spoon. We've seen it the last 3 weeks. I am talking here that the ancients and our great Christians and sisters and brothers in Christ historically have always said that what mattered most was not whether you succeeded or failed, but what sort of a person you are. I'd like to speak personally tonight in the most, I think, personal way that I can speak, because this is how providence works. It was my second day at the White House. I'm certain that I hadn't slept in 48 hours from the awe of it all. And I was given my first marching orders from Karl Rove in the West Wing. He was my boss. "Tim," he said, "President Bush is tasking you with creating a judicial coalition, men and women of goodwill on the outside of the White House, who will come together in a working coalition to support the president's judicial nominees. Actuarially, it's probable that we will be even nominating a Supreme Court justice at some point. Your job is to make sure, Tim, that at the right time, President Bush has a little platoon ready to work overtime to get his Supreme Court, appellate, and district judges confirmed. Are you up to the task?" said Karl. "Yes, sir." And I went to work. My second day at the White House after this meeting resulted in my first real White House meeting. I walked into the office of the White House counsel, and the first person I met was Brett Kavanaugh. I'm raising my right hand. We were destined to be best friends. It was a bromance. We had a different upbringing, that's for sure. I from a middle-class home in Fort Wayne, Indiana. We even lived in a tri-level. My father, my best friend, who's still living in his 80s in Fort Wayne, Indiana, a painting contractor, also a Cradle Lutheran. I went to Indiana University in Bloomington, journalism, in the Ernie Pyle School of Journalism. I love being from the Midwest. My new friend Brett was an only child, unlike me, 2 brothers and a sister. Raised in the Washington suburbs, the Tony suburbs of Bethesda, Maryland. He, a cradle Catholic. He went to one of the most prestigious preparatory schools in all of the United States of America, Georgetown Prep, an all-male Jesuit school. All first principles we had in common: our love of Jesus Christ, our commitment to the first principles of a constitutional government. We were constitutionalists. If I may say, we also shared something else in common. We were sports fanatics. Now, why he could ever love the Baltimore Orioles and the Washington Nationals, I'm not sure. As a cradle Cubs fan, I knew where my loyalties lay. He went to Yale College and Yale Law, top of his class. Here's my right hand for a second time tonight. If Brett Kavanaugh had never been nominated to anything the rest of his life, and you and I had never met and you asked me, tell me, apart from George W. Bush, who was the best man you met across those 8 years? I would have told you Brett M. Kavanaugh. A man of moral excellence and virtue. A man whose yea is yea and nay is nay, and a man who knows the difference. Categorically, without exception, a man who is humble, a person of great integrity, and a remarkably, remarkably talented human being. I received a telephone call as President Trump was whittling down the list. It was from a mutual friend of Brent's and mine, who said, and I quote, "Tim, they're down to 3 names in the Oval Office." And I know that what I'm saying now is off the record, just among us, but I was asked to be a part of Brett's kitchen cabinet, one of the really great honors of my lifetime. May I tell you, it was kind of like a presidential campaign once he was selected. As I've shared with my friend Greg, I was going over the 14th Street Bridge to a deacon's meeting at Emmanuel Lutheran Church, my parish in Alexandria, when my phone rang. It was the White House calling saying, "Can you be in the East Room in an hour and a half?" I said, "I think I can make it." And that night, Brett was officially nominated to be an Associate Justice of the Supreme Court of the United States of America. What a night. To be in the East Room, and I say with humility, I promise, watching my friend be nominated with his wife and his 2 daughters, his girls he calls them, Liza and Margaret. There were his parents, Ed and Margaret, equally remarkable people. By God's grace alone, they raised this American to be the American that all of us want on the Supreme Court. He's normal. He loves Christ and his kingdom. He loves and honors his wife and his children and his parents. He coaches. He goes to baseball games. He serves. May I tell you, I know there's a couple of lawyers in this room tonight. In Washington, D.C., in a white shoe firm, from Yale College, top of your class with a few years in the West Wing, your starting salary is a little over $2 million a year. This is a man who has spent 26 years in public service. 26. 300 opinions on the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals. I want to ask Brett Kavanaugh's greatest critic, the greatest one. If President Trump called you into the Oval Office and said, "Is it true?" and it were true, you would be honor-bound to withdraw your name. Like that. Or to have George W. Bush call you on the telephone and to say, "Brett, I'm going to bat for you. I'm going to be talking with half of the U.S. Senate. I'm going to be vouching for you." 3 calls, 3, with Maine U.S. Senator Susan Collins alone, across 3 telephone calls and over 2.5 hours. The charges were not true. A to Z, zip. I was at the Kennedy School of Government on the day, and I know most of you are sitting down, on the day when 3/4 of the students at Yale Law School had their classes canceled, encouraged by their professors to get on the train, get in their cars, and drive to Washington to protest Brett Kavanaugh. Where is the presumption of innocence in one of the most prestigious law schools in the United States of America? The wonderful thing, of course, is that Providence has his own plan. And I feel very convinced, being in the hearing room across all of those hearings, being in the Senate gallery for the cloture vote and for the final vote last Friday and Saturday, and in the East Room last night for that wonderful official, unofficial swearing in by the President, that the apology which President Trump gave to Donald Trump, gave to Brett Kavanaugh, was precisely the right thing to do. Do you agree? So how are we as Lutheran Christians to think about all this, and our Catholic friends too? We love you. My view is there is one definition. There are Lutherans and those who are destined to be. I know that when you all want some light reading, just after you've read the comics in the morning, I know you all open the Augsburg Confession, and I know you turn to my favorite, Article 16, and you all know what I'm going to say because I know you read it most mornings, of civil authority. It's a powerful part of the Augsburg Confession. And may I say, if it's been a couple of weeks, right, since you've read the Augsburg Confession, may I beg and plead with you to read this section of the AC. As Lutherans, we know that there is, in fact, a nobility in politics. And I want to give the best example that I can possibly give. The year is 1821, and the most beautiful church in Manhattan is a Lutheran church, of course, and it's just been dedicated. And Pastor Frederick Schaefer did what most Lutheran pastors in Manhattan do after they've dedicated a new church. They write out a copy of their sermon, and they put it in an envelope, and they mail it to James Madison, who is, of course, the former president of the United States of America and the primary author and architect of the Constitution. He's now out of office. It was a tough battle in the War of 1812. And Pastor Schaefer sends him a copy of his sermon, and he essentially says to the president, "What do you think?" To use Luther's language, the great Augustinian echo, the kingdoms in conflict, right? The left and the right, the state and the church. Now, I want you to internalize this for one moment with me. This is a Lutheran pastor who is a peer and, living in the same time as the author of the U.S. Constitution, an Anglican, James Madison. Schaefer's a New Yorker, Madison's a Virginian. What a remarkable sermon that must have been. Faith and politics. Faith and the public square. Our faith. the particular Lutheran view of faith in the public arena, I am so humbled to tell you that James Madison wrote back. Can you imagine? Can you imagine sitting in your parish and a letter comes over the transom from James Madison? I'm a nerd, and in heaven, for the first 1,000,000 years, I'm having lunch every day with some of the founders. Beginning with Jimmy Madison, who as an adult never weighed more than 100 pounds and was 5'6". He was like a dwarf. This is the phrase that Madison uses in this letter. He talks about, and I quote, the genius and the courage of Martin Luther. The church is not the state. The state is not the church. But each has a distinct role, and Lutherans are to engage. We are to not disengage, not be separatists, not say it's all broken, and from cynicism to say or conclude that we have no role, just the opposite. God creates government. He creates government with a distinct purpose, the promulgation of justice. It's a gift to us. And as Christians, we are to serve. By the way, this is the third and last time I will raise my right hand in front of you. I am a hopefulist to the core. The best days for our beloved republic are ahead of us and not behind us. And I want to share with you why I believe that. I'm not a happy-go-lucky optimist, and I'm not a confetti to the wind man. I believe it because as Christians, in the echo of Luther, we are not marching toward any victories. The victory has already been won. We are marching from a victory. Christ has already triumphed, right? But it does not mean that we do not have duties attendant to the constitutional rights that have been given to us. I'm going to say this very, very simply. And may I tell you, you and I have never met. I know you said you're a construction worker. I promise you and I could be fast friends. I live in a neighborhood surrounded by people who do not share our worldview. They don't know anybody like you. Trust me. I remember when I first moved to Washington nearly 30 years ago, I kept hearing the words of the Midwest that I was a country bumpkin. And I learned very quickly that living in Washington, there are such things as urban bumpkins, and they all agree and see the world the same. Here's what I would say to your construction fellow men and women. It's very easy. Freedom requires virtue, which requires faith. And this is a note to close on, because this is, if you forget everything I've said, the most important thing that I came to Michigan to share. Our founding fathers and mothers, remember what Abigail Adams said as John was leaving? Don't forget the ladies. Our founding fathers and mothers had a remarkable insight. They learned from the Roman Republic that the key to freedom and liberty over time is moral excellence in the people and in the leaders. I'll say it another way. The other side of freedom is virtue. If you want to have liberty and freedom over lots of years, you better have a lot of moral excellence in the citizens and in the leaders. And our founding fathers and mothers asked themselves a very key question. Don't take my word for it. It's in the letters it's in the diaries, it's in the debate. In the American experience, they said, in the American experience, where do we get moral excellence for the sustenance of citizenship? Where do we get it for the sustenance of liberty? In the American experience, they said it's in the Judeo-Christian tradition. It's from the Bible. Religion and faith shape moral excellence. And I think they were exactly right. And by the way, not any religion. They were very specific about the God of the Bible. I was very honored a few weeks ago to have lunch with perhaps the most brilliant man in Washington, D.C. Yes, there is at least one. Yeah. Daniel Driesbach. He is a scholar of 30 years at American University. He's one of us. With a name like Driesbach, you'd think he'd be Lutheran. I think he's a former Lutheran. He'll come back too. Yeah. Daniel is the most important, with no peer, scholar of the impact of the Bible on the American founding. He doesn't have opinions. He works from empirical data. And he has found that without any equal in the founding period, the number one influencer of our founding fathers and framers in the creation of America was the Holy Bible. There's no close second. None. Not Locke, not Montesquieu, none. By the way, Daniel is also found for his core of 35 founders that the most important book that they reference again and again is the book of Deuteronomy. Why? Not just the concept of the prophet, the priest, and the king, the division of labor, but our founding fathers were preoccupied about a providential nation that had been selected out of all of human history to be a leader in the world. And that's what they believed about America, that providence had created what they referred to in America as the New Jerusalem, the New Israel. They viewed coming across the Atlantic Ocean in the way that the ancient Israelites viewed going through the Red Sea, and that they had been brought to these shores not for economic purposes and not for military purposes, but for religious liberty and the rights of conscience. And that in and of itself is genuinely and truly the story of the founding of America. You know, I feel very strongly that Alexander Solzhenitsyn, the great, peerless, remarkable Russian of the latter part of the Cold War, got it exactly right when he said, and this is one of the most powerful sentences ever written by a human being, at the height of Soviet communism, Solzhenitsyn said, "One word of truth will change the world." And I feel very confident that in all of the social dysfunction and cultural chaos that we as Christians privileged to live in America are facing, I feel very hopeful. I feel very confident that one word of truth, beginning with all of us, in the name of Jesus Christ, will change the world. By the way, we have a country and a culture and a civilization to save, and we better get busy. God bless you.
Well, we'll do the same thing over again. You guys are getting used to the process. So we'll have the microphone circulating around, and if you have any questions, please feel free to ask them.
This does not strike me as a shy bunch on any question, on any topic. Yes, ma'am.
Oh, hold on. Wait, the Microphone's coming.
Can we pass it? We sure can.
I chose her because she's wearing red like Red Riding Hood.
Tim, I couldn't help but notice as you were describing so eloquently your relationship with Brett Kavanaugh, the one thing, and all the things you have in common with him. The one thing you may failed to mention is, do you like beer?
I'm a German Lutheran. I think that answers the question. I was invited to an Episcopal gathering 2 weeks ago, and afterward, I could tell it was an Episcopal gathering because I was offered Merlot. And Brett does like beer, yes. Yes.
Anyone else?
Yes, another question. This is not a shy bunch. This is Michigan. By the way, the reason that Donald Trump is president and not Hillary Clinton, we have 328 million souls in this country. The election was won by less than 80,000 votes in 3 states, Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. And by the way, I did a check on Real Clear Politics. Your region is one of the regions. Yeah. You don't look like a basket of deplorables to me.
What do you see as the thing most likely to change about our Supreme Court with Justice Kavanaugh having been confirmed?
You're not a plant, but that's the best question you could have asked. I am 53 years old. The reason that I do not live in Fort Wayne, Indiana, but live in Washington, D.C., is because I am a passionate pro-lifer. And I was born in 1964, but the cousin to whom I am closest was born in 1973, the year of the infamous Roe. And I was taught as a very young boy the evil of abortion. And I don't know if anybody here has ever heard of Eagle Forum or not, but a member of Eagle Forum in Indiana was very good friends with Phyllis Schlafly, who recruited me very early, and it was love at first sight. Lincoln was once asked, what's wrong with slavery? He said, and the answer he gave could easily be applied to abortion. It's unjust and it's bad policy. So to answer your question, hand over heart. It takes Americans a while sometimes, but we eventually get it right. Every child deserves to be welcomed into the world and protected in the law. My view is that incrementally, the pro-life movement is definitively winning. We have 4 different sets of cases around the country. I believe that at least 2 of those 4 will eventually begin to wend their way to the Supreme Court. I believe under the current court capacity, 5-4, the first constitutionalist majority of my lifetime, maybe of yours, although you only look like you're 15. My guess is that the court will take up those cases. And so although we will not immediately overturn Roe, in my view, I'm speaking from hope. I believe we will begin to gut and to chip away at the result of a case that has given us 60 million abortions since 1973, which is 1 abortion for every citizen living west of the Mississippi, plus the entire country of Italy. So we will be internalizing the result of this as we did with Dred. Let's remember in Dred Scott that 750,000 Americans were killed in the Civil War. But before it was a civil war, it was a cultural battle, a battle of ideas. And the right ideas won. Black people, white people, yellow people, we're all metaphysically, categorically equal. Some of us are not cattle, etc. I'm a Lincoln man, and I'm very proud to be in a Lincoln state.
Can I add something
Please.
about President Lincoln? Another thing he said about slavery, if it's so wonderful, why don't you try it on yourself? And he didn't get any takers. So the same could be said with that. If abortion is such a blessing, as some have argued, would you try it on yourself?
So I believe that the series of cases regarding Roe will begin to be tested under the present Supreme Court. Now, may I cast a vision? We have 3 members of the court who are now in their 80s, right? Actuarially, forgive me, 2 members of the court who are now in their 80s, one who is in his 70s, right? My view is that actuarially we might have some other changes, and the wonderful thing is we have a bench of stars. There are many other Neil Gorsuch's and Brett Kavanaugh's on the bench, right? Yes. Yes, sir.
Hey, Tim.
Hello.
You served in the entire length of the George W. Bush presidency.
Almost, yes.
Almost the entire
yes,
length.
that's yes. In dog years, it was about 5,000 years.
And it was pretty much around the same time when social media and the 24-hour news cycle really amped
Yes, sir.
up. What would be the one thing that you would like to tell everyone and correct the record that you could about the George W. Bush presidency that you think he gets a bad rap for?
I wish I had 9 hours, and for your sake, praise God, I don't. I'll be very candid with you. George W. Bush had to make the most difficult decision that any president constitutionally can make, and it was about the war. And there was and is an enormous revisionism about how he decided that, and about whether the 17-year war in Afghanistan that we are in was the right or the wrong thing. I have written at length, and I do mean at length, about how that decision was made, what the intelligence had to say, and how that decision was made. And I'm sure there is a broad array of opinion in this room tonight, okay? And by the way, the broad array of opinion counts. What's very important to know is that the leaders of both political parties, that the leaders of both political persuasions, left and right, categorically, with no exceptions, saw the exact same intelligence, and over time, many of them had reached the same conclusions. And this fact is lost to history. I'm also a great fan of Ulysses Grant, a much maligned president in his time. If I were a stock buyer, I'd buy stock in Grant because it goes up. And we see what a great president he was and what a remarkable general. Buy stock in George W. Bush. I feel very certain and confident from humility and the facts that over time his stock will rise. He also happens to be a very good man, whose daughter was just married. Yeah.
We have time for one more.
One more. Good.
Oh, we're down here in front.
Hi, thank
Hello.
you for being here with us tonight.
It's an honor.
So you mentioned Phyllis Schlafly. and
The
your
late, great
relation-
Phyllis Schlafly.
Yes. Could you tell us about your friendship with her, and had she ever mentioned President Trump to you prior to the election?
Well, the latter is very clear. Phyllis Schlafly stepped out very early as one of the most early prominent supporters of Donald Trump. And she did a very lengthy piece on why she strongly believed in him on Breitbart. And I had known Phyllis, for more than more than 30 years. And so I called her. And I said, Phyllis, your view always matters. Focus on the family is a big place. And I have a lot of colleagues who are sorting out who they support. Why do you support Donald Trump? In good Phyllis fashion, she said, because he's going to win. That mattered to Phyllis, by the way. It was always great to have the debate, and she was one of the greatest debaters in American history. I mean, she would have been a very good founding father, as I used to say to her. Top of her class from Washington University, top of her class from the Kennedy School of Government. She was a really remarkable woman. Georgetown. There were 2 women in her class, and she was the top of the entire class. She was very gifted, big-brained. And she said, he's going to win because, and this is what she said, because he has the heart and soul of America in his DNA. I said, what do you mean by that? She said, we need strength. She said, we need strength. And she said, not since Ronald Reagan have I felt this strongly about somebody who can bring that strength to the Oval Office. And I have to tell you that, with less than 30 days to go before an election, going back to the earlier question, there's Gorsuch and Kavanaugh, right? There are 26 federal appellate originalists who agree with our worldview, the most senior judges, with dozens of district judges on the bench. Now, I want to be very specific about this because Phyllis was focused like a laser beam on the Supreme Court. In all of Barack Obama's 8 years, President Obama, in all of his 8 years, he nominated and had confirmed 55 appellate judges. Those are the top, right? In less than 2 years, President Trump already has 26. By the end of this calendar year, according to Mitch McConnell, he will have 35. That's extraordinary. And if the Republicans retain the Senate for 2 more years, it's quite possible that at the end of one term, that President Trump will have nominated and confirmed more than 40% of all sitting appellate judges, plus 2 Supreme Court judges with 2 years to come. That is, I promise, unprecedented in the history of the American presidency. Okay, great.